And this is also part of the war. You start essentially taking chances. You're like, okay, so what is the possibility that I will be killed by the suicide drone or by the rocket right now? Well, yes, of course, there is this chance, but this chance is probably small that they will hit this village, that they will hit this house. So, yeah, I will not interrupt whatever I'm doing because, fuck it.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Elevand Stories. I'm your host and driver, Bastian. I know, it has been a long time since the last episode with Nick Toshevsky, and I want to offer my apologies for the very long silence. Especially because it is so important that our support for Ukraine doesn't falter. We are now 1 year into the war and there is no end in sight. The rape and murder of Ukrainians continue mercilessly every single day, and awareness is a force that shapes political policies supporting Ukrainian self-defense. Or in other words, when we, the privileged who are not directly affected by the war, stop looking, we will abandon Ukraine and its fight for freedom and self-determination, the very values we hold to be universal. Having said that, I need to be better. My solidarity counts just like everyone else's, and solidarity without action is self-absorbed. Producing this podcast comes with its own challenges, and I realize that maybe an episode every week will not always be possible. But it will be more regular again than it was over the last 3 months. That is for sure. New guests are already lined up, and I'm very excited to continue my conversations with the many brave Ukrainians who I have come to value so much. So bear with me and stick with us. So with that in mind, thank you so much for tuning in and for coming on the road with us again today. Fonzie's in first gear already, and we are good to go. So buckle up and sit back, because today we are going to Horenka. Hi and welcome to a new episode of the Elevand Stories. Here with me today is Dafna Rachok, an anthropologist from Kyiv, and Ivan Shmatko, a sociologist from Kyiv as well. And I'm very, very happy to have you guys on board today to talk about a lot of things, actually. Welcome to the Elevand.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you for inviting.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. I already said, especially even on a Sunday. I mean, you guys are just amazing. Thanks for making that possible today. I really appreciate it very much. And there's a lot of things I have on my mind that I would like to discuss with you. So before we start, I'll just quickly give a short introduction of you so that everybody knows what it is that you do, what you have done, and then we dive a little deeper into some of the various topics that come to the surface. All right? So, Dafna, you are a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at the Indiana University, Bloomington. You're Ukrainian born with interests in medical and political anthropology. Your research seeks to understand how vulnerable groups in Ukraine respond to existing HIV prevention and treatment programs, and how their attitudes to the state shape their desire or reluctance to seek those programs. February 24th caught you doing field work in Ukraine. So since then, you have been combining your research with volunteering efforts, fundraising, buying and delivering protective gear and medical supplies. Ivan, you are a PhD student in sociology at the University of Alberta in Canada. You have been a part of the volunteer movement in Ukraine since February 24th. You've done research on policing in Ukraine and the imaginaries that shape how police officers see their work and interact with others. Your doctoral research project focuses on experiences of newly mobilized soldiers in Ukraine, which is a topic that we have to also discuss in particular because, to be honest, this is one of my greatest fears, to ever have to fight a war. And it would be very interesting for me to know what has come to the surface in your research in that. So before we go really deeper into the topics, I would like to know, first of all, where are you right now? Which part of Ukraine?
We are in Horenka, which is a village right to the north of Kyiv. It's located between Hostome that some of the listeners may heard of because Russians tried to land their troops on 24th at the airport of Hostomel. So this village is located between Hostomel and Kyiv, right, to the north of Kyiv.
All right. And just really a basic checking in as well. How are you guys doing now that it's been ever since the 24th of February? How are you guys doing in all of this?
I think it's a very complicated question because
of course it is, yes.
One hand, we are alive, we are well, we have a place to live, and yada, 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 yada. So that makes us kind of okay. But on the other hand, the war is still going on. Some of our friends, they are on the front line. Some of our friends, they are POWs. So that makes you kind of like less okay. So, I mean, honestly, now each new day is kind of like juggling these very, very complex it's like an emotional roller coaster.
But you adapt.
Yes.
Yeah.
You certainly adapt. I think most people do adapt. As one of my profs says, human beings are the beings that can adapt to everything. And I think that's pretty much what is happening here.
I think this
We're
is
using
probably...
humor to cope. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're not interrupting. If anyone ever interrupts on this show, it's me, I suppose. So
you interrupt.
I don't apologize at all. Whenever you have something to say, it definitely trumps whatever I have to say. So, you saying that the adaptation, I also do believe this is something that human beings do have, and also a kind of resilience, and self-preservation. Obviously, that's all kind of, together and acting as one in a lot of the cases. But this is a question that just comes up now. How do you adapt to something like war? This is how does this happen? Maybe we can go to your article later on, Ivan, as well. You dealt with that, but now a little time onwards, how do you adapt to that? What does it mean actually in your everyday life?
It's actually a very complicated question that could be answered in many, many different ways. I think it's very important from the start to say that different people experience war differently. The simplest thing to say would be here to say about social class, for example, right? People with different means would experience war differently because they have different possibilities of if they can leave, if they have a car, that becomes important, right? On 24th, for example, of February, we were here in this village as well. So Russians were quite close, but we had a car. So we could essentially pack our stuff there and leave. And people who don't have a car or don't have extra money, right, to spend some time away and or everything, all the belongings, for example, or the means that provide them with living are located in the place they are living. For example, they are farmers, I don't know, or they live out of their garden. There are many people in Ukraine who do that. So they cannot leave because they know if they leave without their gardens, they will not be able to survive. So all those things influence how you experience war. Even small things like having a car, relatively small things. But at the same time, it also depends on where you are, right? You can be in Mariupol city when there is fighting, and it will change how you experience war in comparison to you being in Lviv, which is also from time to time hit by rockets. But so there is war there, right? And you can feel economic repercussions of what's going on. You can feel psychological impact and so on, but it's still a different experience. And those are just few aspects of the question, because as I said, it's a very difficult question, and it can change through time how you experience war, because there is many people repeat now when there was the last time few days ago when many Ukrainian cities were hit by rockets.
Yeah.
And Shahed UAVs, right? Suicide drones. Many people posted the same phrase actually on Twitter and said privately and so on that it was scary on the 24th, but now it's not scary, right? It was scary for the first time, but it was not scary because on the first day of the invasion, the full-scale invasion, also Russians used a lot of rockets. And the reaction was very different. So there is this kind of, once again, adaptation. How you perceive war changes through time, and you do adapt. It perhaps has some, you have perhaps to pay some price for those kind of adaptations. They're not free. But at the same time, you adapt, you experience even the same events, like being in a city that is hit by rockets differently. So yes, it's an extremely complex thing that
I'm
that
glad
requires
that you
a separate discussion. But at the same time, I must say, Dafna already hinted at it. She mentioned humor. I think there is something very specific about how Ukrainians do experience war, and one of the things that has to be mentioned is that Ukrainians do use humor to adapt, like a lot. If you go on, I don't know, for example, Ukrainian Twitter, you will see that it's full of memes, jokes. Oftentimes, those are very dark jokes.
Well, of course. I mean, of course.
would seem to be overly, I don't know, cruel and terrible to perhaps people from, I don't know, Western countries, for example, I don't know, outside. But
I don't think humor should ever be judged, just from my side. Humor, we should be able to laugh at everything. I think this is a basic requirement, especially in the worst of times. Like someone just said, just quickly, if people say now is not the time to laugh, they haven't understood the severity of the situation. And I do stand by that. So I don't think it can be too dark. As long as it gives some relief, it is good enough, and that can be for anyone. So it's just a side note here from me. Yes. So you're preaching to the choir. I understand exactly what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, this war also has this kind of cultural dimension because Ukrainians in general have this tendency of making fun of almost everything, and oftentimes making this kind of sarcastic, ironic, dark jokes. And this war only intensified it because many Ukrainians used those cultural tools of making fun of everything and just adapted them to the war to perhaps sometimes cope with what is happening, sometimes just to enjoy your time, even while there is fighting and so on. And many of the jokes emerge out of soldiers from the front lines, for example. So it's not something that you can see, for example, people making fun of, I don't know, being hit by rockets or whatever of war in Western parts. No, it's not. It's like even people who are as much involved as one can be, they still make fun of it all the time.
I think that's where you need comic relief the most. That's why I think that also makes sense. I mean, look, I'm saying all of these not being familiar with war in a practical sense at all. I'm fully aware of that. But I do believe when you are, really facing darkness and terror, then it is when you need humor the most, I suppose, to keep you maybe a little bit centered, at least. At least that's how I imagine it. And that's kind of what you were saying as well.
I would like
as far as I understand it.
I would like to add one more thing. Is it just war is a weird thing. When you experience it through media, and I worked with some journalists in Ukraine during this war as well, what you get, the impressions that you get about the war is that it's some kind of permanent suffering, permanent destruction, permanent violence, and things like that. But at the same time, when you are in a place where there is a war. Once again, I already mentioned that it may differ from place to place and so on. But generally, even for soldiers, even in cities that are sieged, it's not like that. So we were in Mykolaiv, for example, the city near the front lines, right? And
with terrible atrocities committed there as well.
Yeah, but
yes,
daily life doesn't look like people are afraid and hiding all the time. Daily life there, for example, looks like there are some cafes that are still open, and you go to a Georgian restaurant and have khachapuri and have some lemonade and some nice coffee, and then you have a walk through the streets or go to the boardwalk, since they have a nice boardwalk, and so on and so on. And then in 10 minutes, you can be killed by a rocket, right? It's not a constant permanent suffering. It's like your daily life goes on. Obviously, your daily life is impacted by the war, but still, you are not fully 100% concentrated. Yes, people on the streets talk about the war all the time. Children recreate the war when they play, and war is everywhere. But at the same time, it's not like rockets are flying every minute and everybody's hiding all the time. It's some kind of war is normally some kind of mixture of what people would call normal life and some horrible atrocities. And it's just what you experience as war is you go about your normal life, more or less. And then once again, in 10 minutes, you can be hit by a rocket or you can hear an explosion somewhere or whatever. It just, there is some certain temporality to this, right? It's not how it is portrayed in media.
I think that's very good, and this is why I was looking forward to our conversation so much, because obviously you, as a sociologist and an anthropologist, you always differentiate, and that's very good, because very often we have too little differentiation, I believe, and we always paint things with a broad brush. And you making those differentiations, I think, is incredibly important. So that's why like I said, I was really looking forward to this conversation very much. So I think what you're saying also is that the knowledge of war already is part of the suffering. It's not just the actual, like you said, because it changes, front lines change, realities change. There's adaptation, but the knowledge of it in your head, that it's at the back of your mind, this is maybe already part of the maybe not even suffering, but part of the situation, the challenges you find yourself in during war times. Just the knowledge itself. Could I say that? Is that stupid or?
Oh no, it is by no means stupid, because but I would say it's, and also this is part of what experience of war feels like, that probably you don't often get from media. It's those like very small routine things that the war like prevents you from doing, or it alters how you do it. And for me also, this experience of war, it is also about this inability to do things as you were doing them before the 24th, right? Because yes these you know that the war is going on, right? You know that there are explosions. You still have these air raid alarms going off on your phone. And
by the way,
there is an air raid alarm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect
yes.
timing.
Absolutely. What? There's an air raid now.
Yes.
Yeah, but we can continue anyway.
Okay, you have to tell me if...
it's fine, we don't hide.
It's fine. I mean, there have been like thousands of them already. And
yes, I know,
and this is also part of the war. You start essentially taking chances. You're like, okay, so what is the possibility that I will be killed by these
Iranian drone.
By the suicide drone or by the rocket right now. Well, yes, of course there is this chance, but this chance is probably small that they will hit this village, that they will hit this house. So yeah, I will not interrupt whatever I am doing because I mean.
Wow.
Fuck it. Sorry,
fuck it. You know, this is the most stoic fuck it I've ever heard in my whole life. I mean, really, what you're describing there, it's really like stoicism in its purest form. I take my hat off to that because I think really it goes also with the adaptation you've already mentioned, but also this goes with some sort of inner conviction that you are actually letting on to. So I really take my hat off to that. But having said that, nonetheless, if you hear something nearby or something, please just let me know and disappear. But I know you will. I don't have to tell you that. Fine. As long as you think everything is okay. So just to quickly, in my head also, so basically some of that is also that it really infringes on your freedom of thinking, doesn't it? Like, because whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever used to be routine is always now counter-checked by your knowledge of a war going on and basically scanning everything in front of that background. Could you put it that way, or is that not even the case either? You just really put it away sometimes for days or hours, totally, but it's something that's ever present, isn't it? Isn't that one of the big challenges as well, or the suffering of finding yourself in a war?
I think yes and no. On the one hand, you constantly have at the back of your mind that there is war, and it at the same time also changes the things you do. I mean, it once again differently, but impacts everyone's life. It may change. For example, Dafna went for a conference some months ago, and it changed how much time she spent on going there.
Just
right?
Before the full-scale invasion, there was a direct flight from Kiev to the place where the conference took place. So it would be just like 4 hours on a plane, and I'm there. And now, because there were no flights from Kiev for an obvious reasons, I had to go to Budapest to take a not direct flight from there. And essentially,
to go to Budapest by train.
Yeah, I had to go to Budapest for train. And essentially, to get from Kiev to the place where the conference was, I had to spend 40 plus hours on the road. So like 10 times more.
Or it changes things like, I don't know, now it's okay, but for a few months at the late spring, early summer, there were problems with gas. With gasoline for cars, right? It was hard to find. So it changes all these kind of small daily things that you do, and it stays in your head as a background knowledge of there is war, and it may change something. It's a consideration you take into account when doing your daily things. But at the same time, I would say also no. I mean, it's not something... It's a contextual thing. You have this knowledge that there is a war. You know mostly how it will impact your daily routines, and you apply that knowledge whenever it's applicable. So whenever, for example, if there are problems with gas, you know that there are problems with gas caused by the war because Russians hit some infrastructure. And you adapt accordingly, right? You try to change your routine accordingly. For example, change your means of transportation or change how you, buy that gas, right? Find ways to buy that gas for your car. But at the same time, I wouldn't say it's a constant, this kind of... discourse of trauma-like thought that is constantly in your head, and you are traumatized, and you sit and think about the war in this kind of trauma-like manner. I'm not sure if I can explain it. Can you?
No, I think I understand what you mean.
I can try to go on a little bit further about what you said, because like on the one hand, I think this knowledge of war, it definitely impacts your concentration. It impacts your ability to concentrate on
your
things.
Focus, right? Your focus.
Yes,
That's kind of what I meant. Yes.
It's very difficult for me, like, to be focused solely, for instance, on my academic work when I know that there are, for instance, some like rockets hitting one of the other cities where I have friends, where some of my participants or colleagues live. So there is this kind of like constant like jumpiness, so to say. But on the other hand, I think at least like for me, this adaptation to this war, it was like a little bit like stayed out, there were different phases, because for the first like 3 weeks of the war, I was literally and figuratively speechless. I was lacking words. I didn't know like how to describe it, because it was a new experience, right? And I don't think that it is the kind of experience that you can ever be totally prepared for, because obviously you read different like fiction about wars, we watch different movies about wars, but this like felt experience of war, it's very, very different from the one that you're usually getting from different like media in
popular culture
sense.
As well.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us know war through popular culture. What I mean by that, movies, like you said, and obviously that cannot be reality.
Because in these movies, in different books, when you're reading about the war is also presented as this like total destruction, right? And it doesn't really immerse you into this as much as the real world does. And just so I was like speechless for the first 3 weeks, but then partially like through humor, partially through this step-by-step normalization, I started like finding words to talk about this, maybe to describe this experience in somewhat like lame way, so to say, because when it's a new experience, you still have to like find a proper angle, right? To be able to talk about it, to be able to describe what it really feels like. But I just to kind of go along with what Ivan has just said, I don't think that there was this like continuous trauma. This experience was not something that like put you forever in this mode where you cannot think about anything else but the war. I think that this is this, cunning aspect of this war experience. It's that you don't really know when some of these things will kind of like manifest itself. For instance, I was away from Ukraine for the first time since the full-scale invasion started a few weeks ago. I was away on a conference, and I was sitting there. It was a nice sunny day. People around me were just like going along with their lives. And for the first day, I was basically crying. I was like, it's so normal here. People don't talk about war. How is this possible? And then there was an airplane flying in the sky, and I was the only person who looked at the sky and who was a little bit uncomfortable by the sound of that airplane.
Yes.
So
can I ask you something quickly?
Very
quickly,
sure.
because if you sit there in this place, where were you? If it's not of no importance actually, but
I was in Spain. I was in Malaga.
In Spain. So what if you are sitting there and you realize that it is of no concern to people, isn't that also disheartening a little bit? Because for you, this is the most important thing in the world right now, this war, that it needs to end. You need the support of people. I mean, and obviously you cannot expect that everybody is the same for everyone, but isn't it a bit disheartening to sit there and realize, okay, this is not number one on everyone's agenda at the moment? Other people still have their own lives, or is it something you expect, or something you're like, yeah, obviously this is how life is. You focus on whatever is closest to you.
Yes and no. Sorry.
No, that's very good. I have a tendency to ask these questions today, the yes and no questions.
Because on the one hand, of course, I would like everybody to constantly be aware of what is going on in Ukraine, because it's very dear to me. I want this horrible war to be finished as soon as possible, and I want it to end with Ukrainian unequivocal victory.
Of course.
But on the other hand, I also understand that how you think about this kind of events, it's also determined by the distance, often by the social distance that you have to certain events, right? And I don't know, maybe I will not say the right thing now, but there are a lot of suffering that is happening in other places, right? And
yes.
I mean, there is the genocide of Uyghur people going on. I mean, there is war in Yemen going on. There are
Kurds.
Yes.
That are bombarded by Turkey.
Yes,
exactly.
And by Iran as well now. And by Iran as well now, apparently, yes. So
So on the one hand, yes, of course, I want every single person to care about Ukraine. I want them to support Ukraine. But on the other hand, at this global scale, I understand that, and I also experienced it on me. I know that empathy is limited, unfortunately, right? So on some level, I understand why they are going on with their lives, why if they care, they don't often show it, and why there is this normalcy around them, and they continue to kind of just go with it, seemingly not caring.
Yeah.
Yeah, the world would go into shambles, I think, if everyone would care as much about all the suffering that is going on in the world as people who are engaged in that suffering would like to. It sounds terrible, yes. I know, but that's the reality. If, for instance, I would imagine myself thinking all the time and caring as much as someone engaged in that suffering thinks I should, about all the wars that are going on, but not just wars, right? More social science lingo, structural suffering. So people who are dying of hunger, illnesses that could be treated but are not treated because of, economic inequality, essentially, because they don't have means present, right, to treat, because they don't have access to clean water, for example, and so on and so on. I would go mad. And if I go mad, those people wouldn't get better because of it, right? Nothing would change. Yeah. It's just that I would go mad. And that's all. So on a practical point, I don't think it makes sense for everybody. And that applies to Ukraine. I don't think it makes sense for everybody in the world constantly thinking and tearing themselves apart because of what is happening. At the same time, yes, there is some kind of, we have to find some kind of, in Russian it's said zolotaya seredina, so golden middle.
Middle ground?
Yeah.
Middle ground, right? But
right.
You've translated literal golden middle. Between this kind of not caring at all, going on with your life, whatever, which many people do, and that shouldn't happen, and going completely mad, thinking every minute about all the suffering that is going on, because it's not practical as well. There must be a certain awareness, and a certain awareness that drives you to try and change the situation, help people that need help. But at the same time, it shouldn't go overboard so that you become essentially inactive by consuming all that suffering, internalizing all that suffering yourself. Yeah.
And because you're overwhelmed, and maybe this is just how I see it as well. Maybe there's also an energetic, an energetic cap to some degree, empathetic cap as well. I mean, if you run through the world taking on the suffering of every day, it will overwhelm you and maybe stop you. This isn't basically what you are saying. So, I think that's a very good way to put it. I once again, I admire your kind of stoicism in this as well, and the way you are able to differentiate after all this time now already. Which brings me to the question, you've already hinted at that. I would like to know from you, because you are very much into volunteering now, or into volunteering. That sounds like it's a hobby. That's not what I mean. I mean, you are volunteering a lot. You spend a lot of your time volunteering, in the war. And this is something I would like to get into, obviously your experiences, but also before then, I would like to know, how did you experience the breakout of the war, the 24th of February? How did you experience that?
That's a good question. Sorry, I started...
It's not a yes or no question, right?
I started nervously laughing because there is a lot to unpack. Because we were in this very house. My parents, they really know...
Sorry, just quickly, Dafna. Because just also to understand, you weren't living in Ukraine, right? You were actually just there for projects of yours, right?
We came at the end of summer 2021.
Yes. We returned in August 2021, and I was planning to spend 2 years here doing my fieldwork research.
Okay.
And I didn't really plan to be volunteering during the war, that I can say with certainty. So yes, actually, like before the war, we were moving from Poltava to Kryvyi Rih, and then a few days before the 24th, we came to Horenka, to my parents' house, because we were just like visiting them, and they were planning to go on a vacation abroad. So they essentially asked us to stay in the house.
Well, to visit your brother.
Yeah, to visit
he lives abroad.
To visit my brother, and my brother and his wife, they had a child not so long ago. So there was this blah, 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 all family thing. And so they left on like the 20th of February, and they asked us to stay in this house for 2 weeks to look after it. And we said, yeah, okay, we can do that. And this house, it's very close to Hostomel Airport. It's like 5 kilometers away from the Hostomel Airport. And so the night from the 21st to the 24th, we are trying to sleep, but the dog cannot sleep. She starts barking in the morning, and we have no idea why the hell she's
early morning, yeah.
Yeah, and we are trying to calm her. We are trying, I don't know, like to pamper her and to do everything that we can. But no, she's just inconsolable. And then I open my cell phone and I see the news. Russia is bombing Ukraine. And I'm like, okay, probably something something should be done about that. We have like to make plans what we have to do. And then I go to the bedroom and I wake up Ivan, and I remember how
No, you wait for a while.
No.
I continue for all this time. She's reading news, and
I was reading it.
There is something happening. I'm sleeping.
I was like,
I'm sleeping all the time.
I was reading it for like 15 minutes, and I was thinking like, what should I do? Should I wake him up? But I mean, like, it's still war. Maybe I should give him like another hour to sleep because it's like 5 a.m. and blah, blah, blah. So I have these, like misgivings. And then I come and I wake you up, and I remember how I said like, honey, wake up. I'm sorry. It's so early, but the war has kind of started.
Wow.
Yeah. And
which is why you obviously wanted to let him sleep an hour longer or something, because you knew when you wake him up, like from this moment forward, things are going to be very different. So
yeah, we didn't sleep the next night. So.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think you were being very considerate, Dafna, in my opinion. Anyway.
Well, but we were quite prepared as much as one can be, because unlike many people in Ukraine, who I would speculate did not just didn't believe that the full-scale invasion is going to happen, but I think they actually didn't want to believe that something like that would happen, because believing in that would mean recognizing that you live already in this kind of new world that changes everything and breaks up your life and makes you do things differently, which is a very hard psychologically thing to do. But we kind of expected it. We were among those people who expected it, perhaps because it was a little bit easier for us. We are not that grounded, perhaps, in Ukraine. Once again, we have students abroad. We don't have a lot of property or whatever here, businesses, like life is not rooted here so much. Perhaps that's one of the reasons. I don't know. But we expected it. We had some plans for what to do. We woke up in the morning, obviously started to read news from different sources. We understood what is happening more or less exactly. So general directions of the attack, where Russians are coming from. We understood that one of the directions is from the north, from Belarus, which is close to us. We understood that they are landing airborne troops in Hostomel airport, which is super close to us. Then we went to the street, smelled some smoke, heard helicopters flying and stuff like that. Essentially, heard some explosions. And in some hours, at 3 p.m., I think, so it took some time. We adjusted, we talked about, we were monitoring the situation. We decided to pack quickly, and then we picked up some of our friends, and those were 5 people, 3 dogs in the car, and we went first to the Western Ukraine. The plan was we move out to the safety, and then we decide on what to do, because in occupation, you can't do much unless you're specifically trained or you have very specific plans on what you are going to do. So it's rationally, it's a better option to leave to the safe place and then from there start to help if you want to help. So that's
how
what we
did
did.
you feel at that time, though? I mean, you're just saying like you heard explosions. I mean, how did you feel? Like this is something you've never come across, I suppose, and all of a sudden something like war is so close to you. Like, how did that make you feel? Because you explain it like kind of very matter of factly now, you know,
Yes.
like when we did this and we did that. But I'm sure you must have been in some kind of shock when that happened, right? Or does that come later? That's why I'm asking. Does it come later? Is it at the time? I mean, I had this experience once. I was once hijacked, right, with a gun to my head, and they took my car. And I remember though, I wasn't shocked at the time at all. That only came much later. While it was happening, I was actually very calm, and I knew what I had to do. I knew I just had to do what they said, keep calm. And only when they had left and gone, I was still lying on the ground thinking, okay, they'll come back now and shoot me. And then I realized, well, but you could get up now and just make it more difficult for them, right? So, but while it's happening, you're very calm. So how was that for you, actually?
I think we were very concentrated on the algorithm of what we should do, what we should take with us, on determining like the best road to leave Kiev and the like best Kiev.
Shame on you.
And the best. I said Kiev. No,
You said Kiev.
no,
Yes.
it's Kiev. It's always Kiev. And determining the best, like pickup spots, pickup locations to take our friends. I remember that.
Kiev is a Russian pronunciation, Kiev is Ukrainian. And
That's. I was just going to
Kiev
go
is
into that.
Russian
There was a
and
phonetic
Kiev is
dispute, right?
Ukrainian.
Yeah.
exactly, yes. Not understandable, perhaps, for most of the foreigners.
Right, yeah. It's
Slavs talk about
like
differences in their languages.
when you pronounce Ukrainian cities in English, it's always difficult for me because it feels like unnatural to do that because I know how to say them in Ukrainian, and then when I have to transliterate them in my head, it's some kind of bastardization of Ukrainian.
I have that with German cities as well sometimes, even though they come close and there's also English terms, but sometimes it's very weird, very, very weird. Yeah. But just for the record, so that everybody understands. So what is the proper way to say it? Kyiv, right?
Kyiv.
So it's like a double.
I know it's difficult for.
I think that Kyiv. There is this sound in Ukrainian, which is difficult to pronounce for many foreigners.
Yes.
Well, I'm struggling, so I'm definitely one of them. So Kyiv.
It's fine.
Is that
Kyiv.
Yes, Kyiv.
Ivan's just like, let's not bother with this guy. It's like he's not going to get it right.
No,
Okay,
it's fine.
sorry,
I was joking when I corrected you.
No, of course, and it's like, but it's very interesting because obviously, like, phonetics is a very big part of all of this as well, as far as I've understood. Like the writing, the language, because this is where a lot of the cultural appropriation has also been leaving its mark to some degree. But
it's
just yeah.
It's because the Russians essentially spend a lot of time raising those issues, right? Trying to imperially say that there is no Ukrainian, that it's just a dialect of Russian and yada yada. And that obviously pushed many Ukrainians to highlight the differences, so to say, right?
Yes.
Demand foreigners, for example, to pronounce Kiev, try to pronounce Kiev the Ukrainian way, and all these kind of things. Because when you are constantly told that the language doesn't exist and you're just a small Russian, naturally, at certain point, you want to show, no, it's not like that. But sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, but also
No, go for it, Dafna. Sorry, yes.
These phonetic differences, they also come to play this like funny part in this war. For instance, with this word palyanytsia.
Talking about humor.
Which is basically like a loaf of bread, and usually it's,
in Ukraine.
Yeah, in Ukrainian it means a loaf of bread, and this bread is usually made from wheat or rye. But I mean, like, we can debate all that stuff. But essentially, in Ukrainian there is this word palyanytsia, and this word is really difficult to pronounce for people who are Russian speakers, because this soft ts is not really common in Russian language. And so there were like a lot of jokes and memes in Ukraine, especially at the beginning of the war. So like, if you really want to tell Ukrainian from Russian, just like ask them to pronounce this word palyanytsia.
And there were actually cases that Russian spies were caught by...
Oh, really?
Because they couldn't pronounce it. Yes.
Wow. I mean, this is, language is so important. And also, just to get back, like, really in Russia, Ukraine has been called Little Russia, like, really all the time, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is showing the extent of how much there has been this supercilious attitude, I would say, towards Ukraine, and how Russia is just still its big daddy and has to determine everything that's going on there. But we interrupted you, Dafna. Sorry, that was me, about how you went to Kiev. We took a little bit of a side stroll there, but now back to...
okay. I love talking about all these like linguistic things that become prominent in this war. But yeah, so it was the 24th of February. We heard these explosions, and we were really concentrated on this like small task at hand of like how to organize the evacuation in the practical and the optimal manner. But on the other hand, I also remember that how I was kind of like falling on the ground when I was hearing explosions. And I was also remember how I was like trying like to cover the dog with my body, because she was really scared. She was like still a puppy at the time. Probably, I don't know, maybe it was a very stupid thing to do, but I mean, like, still I was pretty... I was worrying about her because like she didn't really know what to do and stuff. And I also remember that we were in a little bit of hurry and that we couldn't really locate the keys.
Yes.
for some time, because even though we were trying like to stay calm and practical, still it kind of like gets on your nerves. Like all these helicopters flying, the smell of smoke.
Of course.
Sounds of explosions. And then actually we located the keys, we put everything in the car, we closed the house, and we left.
But I think about emotions, I think obviously there was fear. No one will tell you, oh, I was fearless or whatever. But I think predominant emotion was...
That would also be stupid.
Probably,
I mean, to be fearless is also stupid, to be honest.
Perhaps,
I think, yes.
But I think the predominant emotion was anger. I'm always skeptical about even about my own recollections of such events in the past, because we as human beings tend to sometimes describe it in a manner that is not how it was going on. But I think the predominant emotion was anger. We were pissed off, and I think that pissed off because of this kind of full-scale invasion, because how it was performed, right? Essentially, to simplify, it was perceived as some kind of simplification, a bully, right? Someone tries to impose control over you as people, over your country, and so on, and spends a lot of time on this because it started a long time ago. We can debate on where exactly, but in 2004 there was an Orange Revolution. Putin, right, congratulated Yanukovych at the time and spent a lot that he won, which he didn't. Eventually, another guy, Yushchenko, became a president. There was a first revolution, Orange Revolution. And at the time already, it was seen that Putin invested in a lot of different kind of resources into pro-Russian politicians in Ukraine, right? Trying to control politically Ukraine. As it became clear later, because of some kind of imperial ambitions, because Ukraine is so important symbolically for Russians for some reason, for the Russian imperial project. So they spent many years on this, and then in almost 20 years, essentially, they understood that it's not working, that Ukraine is still not controlled by them, that Ukrainians don't want predominantly to be a part of Russia, or to be told to become this kind of like Belarus right now, right? Formally independent state, but essentially a state that is controlled by Russia almost fully. And eventually it led to this kind of reaction: if I can't control you more or less peacefully, then I will just make you by force, like make you mine by force, something like that. And that created just a very common reaction. It wasn't just us; many people got really pissed. So that's why this war is, perhaps we'll talk about it later, I don't know, but that's why it changed the character of war in many respects. It will sound perhaps for some too much, but I use it more analytically than as a propaganda words. It impacted how the war is going on, and the war became a little bit patriotic total war, because I can explain what I mean by that. Many people with different views went to war or went to volunteering to help, and some, like many, I don't know, thousands or millions of people. If there are even polls that ask people if you either volunteered to fight, volunteered yourself, or donated money to volunteers, for example, or directly to the people that are fighting. And I don't remember exactly the numbers.
I remember some of the numbers because I was editing the chapter where I used them yesterday. And so this sociology group called Rating, which is like one of the like trustable sources of who performs polls in Ukraine, they did such a poll.
A Ukrainian group.
Yes. It's a Ukrainian sociology.
Good one. They do good polls.
Good one.
I mean,
there are different types of crap. And so they did this poll in April 2022, and they were asking people these questions like, are you fighting yourself? Are you donating money to the armed forces? Or like, are you working in the like critical infrastructure to keep up all these like communications running? And essentially more than 80% of people, they belong to this group that are already doing something for the war. They are volunteering, or they are donating, or they are fighting themselves, or they are working in this critical infrastructure, which is...
yes, and the second part of the argument why we can call it a patriotic war, great patriotic war, to use a term applied to a different war normally here.
Yes.
Is that people of very different views want to fight, right? So you could see that it's not just people, for example, with nationalist views, people who fight for the state, well, because it's a state and I belong to it and yada yada, but people with liberal views, people with left views, anarchists, for example, right, who essentially kind of don't fight for the state, right, as such. And I would explain it, both of those facts, that most of the people are involved in war efforts, and that people with very, very different views are fighting or volunteering, is because I think, and that's a speculation, but I would explain it because there was this kind of feeling of anger and being pissed off by someone trying to impose their will by force, right? It's quite a common feeling, right? Many people get mad when they see this kind of raw force going on, when they see that someone is just trying to forcefully make someone do something. People get mad of it. And it just happened on this kind of, on a bigger scale of one country trying to impose their imperial
and it's not
will
limited to Ukraine either, because I remember that was one of my first emotions as well. I was incredibly pissed off when I heard. I also remember when I first found out 24th, because usually I get up, I read the news as well, which is sometimes maybe also not the best idea, but I do it anyway. And I was pissed off. And this can be an incredibly powerful and creative force, actually, being pissed off.
Oh,
and that's exactly what you're saying. So I can relate to that. And I think it goes for a lot of people. Also, when you say about, first of all, the Great Patriotic War is usually referred to as the Second World War, right? In Russian culture. And so maybe this is another part to break this away. Your patriotic war for Ukraine is maybe going to be this one, another, way to just break it apart a little bit. Those are very, very interesting points. That being pissed off, I think, is a very, very strong force to be reckoned with. Now you explained how you got out of close to Hostomel, your parents' place, Dafna, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you moved out, you moved everything away. When did you realize that you wanted to do the volunteering, and how did you think you would do the volunteering? Because you also said for 3 weeks you were kind of speechless a little bit. You didn't know what to say. You had to collect yourself a little bit. How did you then come up with the idea of volunteering and what you wanted to do?
Actually, I think that we knew that we would try to volunteer even before something happened, because so there were these discussions whether something is going to happen or no, like before, like, I don't know, 2 weeks, 1 week before the 21st, because I think like for the whole like February, people were expecting, right? There was, I think, like 16th of February, it was named by like American and British intelligence at the invasion date. Then there was like the 20th of February. So like we were talking about it among ourselves, and we were saying that, okay, like we want to volunteer. We want to do something if something happens. Of course, we were imagining what we would do. So like the thing that we were imagining we would do, it is a different thing than we ended up doing, because, well, reality is infinitely like more complex, and there are way more factors that you cannot really take into account when you are like making your grandiose plans. And
yes.
While you are thinking, it's all red.
Yeah. So
there isn't. You can't see, right?
The air raid.
So this is about the air raid.
Or you can see this way.
Yeah, so essentially,
I can see now. It's basically the map of Ukraine, and it's all red, right?
Yes, because there is an error alert everywhere, essentially.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Wow. No. This is good to know. Also, what situation you find yourself in now. Yeah. Sorry, Dafna. Yes.
And so we kind of like started volunteering from like day one after we left Kiev, because he came up with this idea of translating the
I think, if you don't mind, first,
go ahead.
We were, from the very start, we were thinking about doing something what I call imperfectly physical. I mean, actually doing something with our hands, moving something, driving something. I don't know. But we couldn't find anything. No, we donated blood a few days before the war, in expectation of the war, just in case, before the full-scale invasion. And after it happened, we were calling like to donate blood, but you would call, and those centers that collect blood, they were like saying, no, we don't need more blood because we are full. So many people came to donate blood. Once again, talking about this kind of total character of war. So many people went to do something to help that they didn't need more donors because they were full with blood. So many people came. And then you would call to some centers, volunteer groups that already existed. And all of them would say, no, we have so many volunteers that we will not be able to manage more. We don't need you. Everything was packed with people who wanted to do something. The same was going on actually near the military recruitment offices. There were lines of people who were trying to get weapons and volunteer to the army or to territorial defense forces, which is part of the army, but oftentimes separated into two entities. I mean, this is a very important thing to explain, that we were trying to do something, but every time we were calling somewhere, they were saying, so many people came, we don't need you. We couldn't find a place.
So you were turned down. Yes.
And then...
Which must have been very disheartening and frustrating, actually.
No, it was perfect.
On the one hand, yes, because it doesn't allow you to feel useful. But on the other hand, it's very inspiring because you see how many people actually volunteer. That you see the announcement, you call these people like 15 minutes after you saw this announcement, and they're like, no, like, sorry, we already have like a crew to do whatever we need to do.
Announcements like, for example, border services, at certain points they posted an announcement like, we need people with cars who would help us to move things around. And then I called them in about an hour after I saw the announcement, and they immediately said, no, we have so many people that already called, we don't need you. This kind of things, right?
Yep. Amazing.
Yeah. So we were thinking about what we can do, and maybe you will talk about it since it was your idea about this.
I don't think we should go into details.
Okay.
Perhaps,
so,
but
you can also go into detail. Whatever feels right to you.
Got involved into things that you can do quickly by yourself with just your laptop. We were engaged in some internet activism, essentially translating. At the time, doing the things that got a little bit controversial for some, translating into... There were first videos of captured Russian soldiers in Ukraine. And at the time, we thought that it was very important because the vibe before the war and during the first hours and days was that Ukraine will lose in 3 days or whatever, in 5 days. There is no hope. You can see it even by the weapons that Americans and the British were providing, right? They were providing weapons for the insurgency, essentially.
Like anti-tank, all those.
Yes, small anti-tank weapons that...
Or the Germans in the beginning were just sending helmets and vests, for instance. That has luckily changed, yes.
So
but
even intelligence services and the public and journalists were expecting that Ukraine will fall. So it was we thought it was important to show that Ukraine is fighting and that Ukraine is not falling. And we thought that we can do it by... There were first videos in Ukrainian Russian of captured Russian soldiers. And it was en masse, like many, many captured Russian soldiers. But we understood at a certain point that we get that information, but people who read in English don't at that time. Afterwards, it became like institutionalized. Secret services started to do it themselves and on a much bigger scale. So we stopped our activity. But at the beginning, no one was doing it, kind of. So we started to do it. We organized a bunch of people who would transcribe, make transcripts, and put those transcripts on videos. And we would post those videos with captured Russian soldiers online.
With English subtitles.
With English subtitle.
Yeah.
So that people abroad could see that Ukraine is not falling. In fact, here are captured Russian soldiers. And we were doing it for some time. Some people were engaged. But at a certain point, I talked to one of my acquaintances that I knew from our student activism when we were students in Ukraine. And he told me that he was in this territorial defense forces, a volunteer, and he said that we don't have almost anything except an automatic gun. Like, we don't have bulletproof vests, we don't have any kind of equipment and so on. And I understood that despite this kind of, so many people went to volunteer, the existing infrastructure, the existing organizations, the existing initiatives, they still cannot cope with the needs, right? So there are many, many people who want to do something, but still, despite that, needs are not covered because most people want to join the already existing initiatives, but they don't organize anything themselves. And existing initiatives, they just cannot handle so many people coming, right? They cannot grow so fast. They cannot manage so many people. So we understood that we just need to do everything ourselves, not just call somewhere and say, hey, do you need volunteers? But essentially organize everything from the scratch. And that's what we did.
Become a hub in a way also.
That's what we did. We went into our car and went to Lviv, packed our car with supplies, all kind of medical supplies, and went to Kyiv. And we didn't have a very well-developed plan or anything. We just were bringing stuff, and then suddenly it started to grow by itself through networks of people who know people. Sometimes we would start to get calls from, hey, I'm Svetlana, I'm calling from Ivan, because I know you are going from this place to this place. Can you help me with this or this? And we didn't know neither Svetlana nor Ivan, who gave her our contacts, because it started to surface through some kind of people that we didn't know. But we were generally saying,
which is always a good sign, because it's showing that it's growing and it's catching on.
So many people needed something. But once again, there was not enough help going on, despite this kind of thousands of people volunteering. And then we would there were many, many checkpoints, obviously, military and police checkpoints. We would be stopped on checkpoints oftentimes, and we would be asked, where are you going? What are you doing? We would, hey, the car is packed. We are volunteers bringing this and this, whatever, bulletproof vests, medical supplies, whatever. And they would say, oh, well, we don't have bulletproof vests. Can you bring something to us? So this was another way of this network is growing. And eventually we ended up with a huge, huge, huge network of very different people that was constantly growing and growing. And we started to do it as a full-time job, essentially, going from one city to another, going to the Western Ukraine, packing our car with whatever.
I also think that how it grew, one of the indicators that these are two people's show grew, it's that we kind of also had to split functions.
Yes.
At one of the times, because he was driving, because he knows how to drive fast. I am a much slower driver, but I know how to coordinate stuff. And so at a certain point, I just stayed in Kryvyi because we were supposed to leave there at some point. And I was just staying there, and I was basically taking orders, so to say, from people. And I was also then finding other people who have the stuff that we need, collecting donations and basically making
fundraising.
Fundraising. And then I was essentially like telling him, so there is like staff A waiting for you at a location B that needs to go to location C. So like, can you please like do the logistical thing, please?
But before that, we were just driving together. I was driving most of the time. She was on the phone, constantly communicating with people from whom we could buy some things or just take it for free, depending. It was a complicated operation. And talking to people who needed something, coordinated of when we can meet them, where we can get stuff, like doing all the kind of logistic stuff. I was driving, we were both packing, also talking with friendly initiatives, all kind of friendly initiatives. And we were together for some time, then separated, but did the thing. And then the nature of volunteering changed because it's... war is also a very rapid thing. Like needs changed very quickly, and volunteering depended on how those needs were changing. Because at the beginning, for example, almost everything was needed. Suddenly, you would get many people displaced, and many people who went into the army. And obviously, even for the rich state, it wouldn't be impossible to quickly supply hundreds and hundreds of thousands more of troops, right, with everything needed. But Ukraine is a poor state, so it was a completely impossible task. At certain point, for instance, the Minister of Defense said that during the first months, I don't remember exactly of what period she was talking about, the first months, 85, if I'm not mistaken, percent of all bulletproof vests in the army were brought by volunteers, not by the state. You can imagine how much is that? Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that shows the scale of missing.
So there were many initiatives that helped. Like us, they could work in differently, slightly, depending on how they were organized and what kind of resources they have. And then eventually, volunteering also went into some kind of specialization. So volunteers. Started to specialize in. Some volunteers would get the stuff from Kiev and would bring it to the east, for example. Some volunteers would not fundraise, but would just coordinate what is needed with this specific unit on the front line. Some volunteers would fundraise and buy, right? Later on, the more specialization appeared.
So efficiency was just rising, basically, by having clearly defined. Yes, absolutely.
Correct. Okay. Many initiatives started to coordinate more and so specialize more. Some people knew better how to bring it to the front line. Some people knew better how to fundraise and procure, and so on and so on. And except for the big initiatives, like there is essentially two largest.
Red Cross
forgot something.
And the World Food Program, because this is something that I read in your article, Dafna, like that there is like the big organizations. But that's not what you were going to say, Ivan. Sorry, I interrupted
Ukrainian initiatives that more of a war effort focused. Poverny Живым and Portrayals Foundation. Portrayals is
what do they do usually? Did they exist before the war? Yes, I suppose.
Yes, both of them existed before the war.
What did they do before the war? What was their key?
Poverny Живым, Come Back Alive in English. They were war effort centered. They grew substantially after 24th, but they existed for some years.
I think they started to exist after 2014.
2014, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were war effort related. They don't do humanitarian stuff, except for they helped veterans of the war with after war adaptation.
Yes,
and psychological
dealing
help.
with post-traumatic stress, for instance.
Yes, all those kind of things. Yes. But everything else they did was war related. So they trained troops, bought supplies, were buying supplies, and Portrayals Foundation also does war-related efforts, but they also do some humanitarian help. Those are two biggest Ukrainian initiatives that existed before and still exist now, grew substantially. yes, Preto Foundation is, for example, famous for first fundraising in just few weeks or a week, I don't remember exactly, money for 3 Bayraktars that were eventually donated.
So they were raising for 3 Bayraktars, but they became famous that they gathered so much money that they were able to buy 4 Bayraktars.
But eventually they didn't buy those were donated, but instead they bought a satellite. So
all right, but Bayraktars are missiles, right?
Those are unmanned aerial vehicles.
Unmanned aerial vehicles, yes, that's it, yes.
That became famous during this war. There are even songs about them now in Ukraine. Turkish made unmanned aerial vehicles.
Questionable history because they were developed to fight insurgency in the mountains, so they were developed to fight
yes, it's complicated.
Kurdish people.
But
yes.
The producer of them sympathizes Ukrainian cause, so he often donates and helps and is open to. So yes, but those are not just for reconnaissance. They can do both reconnaissance and bomb themselves targets.
Yeah.
And then they use those money to buy a whole satellite that helps Ukrainian military. So volunteers in Ukraine bought a satellite. You can think about this in that way. And Pornizhavim actually bought Bayraktars because it was important for them for those, and they procured a license essentially to buy military equipment nowadays. So this is crazy. Yes, those are the biggest foundations. They do and can afford themselves to do bigger things that small volunteering groups cannot do.
Just quickly with the communications and the satellite, I mean, it's something that is so incredibly important. So it's also what you said in the beginning, that these news clips or these clippings, whatever you want to call them, of surrendering Russians, for instance, that you made them available to the public at large outside of Ukraine. I think that's an incredibly important task that you did there, because a war is fought in the hearts and minds of people, I think, in a big way. And you also said the bully Russia, and you were afraid it was an oversimplification. I maybe it is to some degree, but I also think it's very valid in that particular case to look at it that way, because that way you have a clear focus and compass of who we need to support, and that's obviously Ukraine. Because when there's a bully on the playground, you don't stand by and just watch what develops, but you will have to see what goes on, because next time you're on that playground, that bully might also turn to you. And I think that's very apt. So that's why communication in that sense outside of Ukraine, to have people support the cause of Ukraine. And then we also get to weapons, Bayraktars or HIMARS. Now I think Germany are sending these Iris airstrike missiles.
Iris-T, yes.
Iris-T, yes. I'm still not that, that great with the weapon systems and everything, because but I'm getting there a little bit, at least, to know what's being shipped. And in order for that to happen, there has to be good information, and Ukraine has to keep on reaching the minds and hearts of people. So this is why satellite, and also Starlink of Elon Musk, which has also helped, I think, significantly in keeping communications up. I'm not advertising Elon Musk. I have a lot of problems with Elon Musk, so don't take this the wrong way.
Let's say it. He is a fucker.
I'm not afraid to say that. I'm not afraid to say this. I'm not advertising.
Listening, go fuck yourself. He is not listening, but
I
let that stand.
Sorry,
he might. He might at some point. Who knows? I share that opinion.
If you do, go fuck yourself, Yulma.
No, seriously, because the way he used the war in Ukraine, for self-promotion, is just, I don't know.
It's even before the war, he's a dick.
No, of course.
He exploits his workers.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yes. But I mean, just the war, kind of before this whole incident, a lot of people in Ukraine, they had this positive image of him, but now everybody kind of knows that he's a dick.
Yes, I think especially after the last tweet, where not the last one, but one of his tweets where he basically stated the peace for Ukraine and how it could occur, basically to have Ukraine as a neutral state in between. I mean, it was just a bunch of bullshit. I think with that
Yes.
tweet, the latest, he lost all support in Ukraine because it was just, I think even Andriy Melnik, I think the chief diplomat in Germany,
Yes.
who is not known for mincing his words, he even said,
Yes.
with all due diplomatic respect, go fuck yourself, Elon Musk.
He was right, yeah.
Yes.
He's not a
absolutely.
representative in Germany anymore, by the way. But
No, he's not. He just left, and,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
to some degree, I'm actually a little. I think he overdid it sometimes, but to some degree, I also think he made some very strong points and arguments, and
Yeah, I think so.
also
It was
very
good.
often exposed the hybris also that we have in Germany to some degree. A lot of the times, he will be missed. At least for me, not by everybody, but from my side, he will be missed. Getting back to that, yes. So some very important things, satellite and to keep that communication up and going. You are still doing a lot of showing a lot of support and fundraising for the defense forces, aren't you, Ivan? You have a focus on that, as far as I understand, or is that not correct?
what do you mean?
Like
Exactly.
you still provide a lot of support for the armed forces in Ukraine. Like I think in provision runs and also getting stuff to the soldiers, basically.
I get what you're
needed
saying. So
equipment.
I think me and Dafna, at a certain point, for various reasons, we burned out. It was already hard to fundraise. We knew that moment would come. And other reasons, we decided to leave volunteering. It took a while because it's kind of hard to leave volunteering.
Sorry, it's just like some people, they were like laughing at me because I was telling them that I'm stopping to volunteer for like a few months. And each time they would see me, I would say that, we will just like procure this one thing and then it's the last thing and we'll stop. And
because people continue to call and ask for things and
Yes.
it's hard to say no. But essentially, we almost completely left volunteering. Almost completely because there are still some things pop up here and there. And we help here and there. And obviously, we continue to donate to big initiatives. Or small initiatives, for that matter, as well.
big initiatives, meaning like Come Back Alive.
Yeah, and our friends from the front lines.
These like initiatives that are Ukraine based and
Yes.
like not these
Yes.
international.
You can talk about it more later.
Yeah, sorry, just
Yes,
separate- yeah.
I would like to get into that because you have raised a couple of very interesting points there. Yes.
Yes, but we almost completely left volunteering. So am I right?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. So I wouldn't call us volunteers anymore. So sometimes we do something, but it's not like a
Okay.
full-time thing anymore.
I think also because
Okay.
at a certain point, you were talking about how like needs were changing, right?
Yes.
And at a certain point, the needs, they become really specific. So I need this thermal imager, or I need like this kind of thing. And we were like still procuring those, we were still delivering those. But I also think that at a certain point, like these big foundations like Come Back Alive and also like the Ukrainian state, they also started like procuring more stuff. So there was not as much of a demand for like volunteering as it was at the very beginning, because at when the full scale invasion just happened, the volunteers like Ivan and I, they helped to kind of like saturate the army with the things that were needed, right? But then step by step, kind of like the state and all these like Come Back Alive, kind of foundation, they were able to to pick up the slack. And so we also kind of like felt that, okay, if we withdraw right now, it will be kind of like a fair deal.
Yeah. No, also it's what you said in the beginning. I do believe you need to have energy to help, and if you do this day in, day out, it will be very difficult to uphold like an energetic level where you can continue doing that in a way that it's really helpful. So I think that makes absolute sense, at least to me. But there has been something. You have an article which I will link to as well in the show notes for everybody who wants to read the whole thing. And you talk about your experience as a volunteer. And you also tell two stories, basically. I just want to quote from the one and want to ask you about that in a little more detail. You wrote, "There has been a lot of anger on the part of Ukrainians aimed at the big organizations like the World Food Program or the International Committee of the Red Cross that haven't done much to help since February. And there has been also a lot of anger aimed at the organizations that have been unwilling to change their operational rules when helping people who are fleeing the war." Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Oh, yes, definitely. So there was a lot of talk about how efficient these small-scale volunteering campaigns have been, precisely because they were able to be flexible and to respond to the needs fast. Because if a person is on the front lines and they need a bulletproof vest, they cannot really wait for 3 weeks or for a month for that vest to make it to them, right? They need it ASAP. And if you're this kind of like low-grade volunteer as a sweeper, you don't have like a lot of these like reporting rules. Everything is based on trust between you and people who donate to you, between you and the person you are buying this vest from, and essentially these things. So this really gives you some some pluses in the sense that you're able to accomplish this thing fast, right? So like, here is this need in a few days or in a week, like here are the things that you have asked for. But with this big organization, they still, for some reasons, they were very reluctant to change to ease all those like reporting requirements. And this is also partly a criticism that can be applied to the Ukrainian state and like to the armed forces, because like for every little thing that you provide to someone, there has to be a paper written whom you have provided it for, like what were the money that you bought it with and stuff like that. And as you can imagine, this really makes this whole like enterprise of volunteering much slower. And especially when you're working with humanitarian needs, when you're working with displaced people who need food, people who need hygiene items, people who need some like medical supplies, it really, this slowness, it contributes to suffering. It creates more suffering, and sometimes it creates death. And this is one of my huge problems with this big organization, because by not being willing to compromise some of these requirements of transparency, of reporting, of paperwork, and blah, 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 they were essentially creating more suffering. They were essentially creating more death. And that's one point that I want to make. And the second point, it's also that some of the organizations like Red Cross, when they come to Ukraine and they are trying to organize some kind of humanitarian corridor, they work in such a way that they need to secure the agreement of all sides to organize the corridor. And it just doesn't really work in conflicts like this, because I mean, the war in Ukraine lasts from 2014, right? And since 2014, there have been many instances when Russia gave a certain promise to Ukrainian side and then they broke it. I mean, like Ilovaisk, when Russia promised those Ukrainian soldiers that were captured that were surrounded in the Ilovaisk, they promised them like a free passage out, and then they just shot at the soldiers as they were evacuating, essentially. And I mean, like, for many Ukrainians, it was like the last drop. They said like, no more, this side cannot be trusted. So it's really a moot point to negotiate with them and to try to organize evacuation of people with their yes, because they will not give you this yes, or if they give you this yes, they will then break it. We have seen it many times. And yet, a lot of international organizations, they said that like, no, this is how we work. We are providing humanitarian corridors only if we secure yes from both sides. And in some instances, it led to the situation like in Irpin, the town that just like 15 kilometers from here. Yeah. It was heavily shelled. A lot of people were dying there. And those international organizations, they said like, no, like we couldn't secure this yes from the Russian side, so we cannot really help you to organize the evacuation on this day. And so Ukrainian volunteers, again, people, just like usual people like you and I who had their cars, they were risking their lives and going there and filling their cars with people, cats, dogs, whomever they could rescue, and driving them away to Kiev. So yeah, that's the second story. And also, there's just like a very minor third point is that a lot of these organizations, like for instance, World Food Program, they work in this in such a way that there is a guy sitting somewhere like in England, in first world, to whom part of these duties of humanitarian effort are being outsourced, right? He has like salary, he has a nice like first world salary, and then this guy, he outsources some of these duties to the next guy who also has this salary, and then this guy outsources some of the other things to another guy. And so there's this whole chain of outsourcing happens, and then you as a person on the ground in Ukraine, you end up driving those fucking world food packages for your gas money on your own car, and you spend your time to drive it to the people who need it, and also some of these reporting requirements also fall on your back, which feels profoundly unjust and unfair. I mean, like, I don't really mind using my time, using my money, using my car and blah, blah, blah to help people and to drive food packages to them. That's not the point. The point is that how this whole distribution chain is organized is profoundly unfair, because it's people on the ground here who do the greatest chunk of the work, and we are essentially like left to do it all for free.
Except the good feeling of doing something good.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not just like saying like, give me all this money, but just like there are more efficient ways to organize how this humanitarian aid is distributed. Yeah.
So what you're basically also saying is that it relies heavily on volunteers, right? Yes. That are investing their time, their own resources, and get nothing in return, basically.
Yeah, you can just, I don't know, like feel good for being able to help people, but it just, you know how much money these organizations have, right? And sometimes I was thinking like, if Ivan and I had that amount of money, oh my God, we could do like so much good here. We would be able like to scale up our like organization. We would be able to buy like not 10 bulletproof vests, but 100 of them, because sometimes the amount of orders, the amount of requests that we were getting from people, it was much more than the amount of money we had. And it was really a horrible decision, like whether you would buy 10 bulletproof vests and 10 helmets, or whether you would buy just like 20 bulletproof vests. And so you would leave like some people essentially like without helmets.
Yeah.
I hate to be this like arbiter of who lives and who dies, you know?
Oh, of course. I don't think, anyone in their right mind would like to be that. How do you think that can be improved? Because the thing is, I think this is not just for organizations, humanitarian organizations. I mean, you see that in politics as well. Very often things just get stranded because the administrational beast has grown so big that to get things moving takes so much effort that a lot of the energy gets lost in between the cogs of the machine, So how, according to you, do you think this could be improved, like by more decentralized kind of work efforts? Do you see any other way of dealing with it?
Well, part of the problem, it's bigger than this institution, this big organization, right? Because it's this kind of it's this problem
Attitude
of
as well.
Modernity, so to say. Sorry, I'm being like very social science and
more social science
but it's
awareness.
Yes, but
Red alert.
Yes.
How we do things in the latest century, right? We value these kind of like transparency things. We kind of value all these like reporting things to make sure that like all the paperwork is right and blah 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 blah. So it's not really an easy fix, but on the other hand, to make some improvements here and now. So there has been a lot of talk happening about decolonization of humanitarian aid, right? And one of the ways to decolonize it, it's precisely to ensure like a more equal distribution of resources. For instance, we can cut the middleman, because we don't really need like 3 or 4 people in between the UN office and people in Ukraine, the volunteers in Ukraine who do all these works. Because I think more money could be streamlined directly to local organizations who do a bunch of work. I don't really remember the numbers right now, but there have already been like some preliminary studies showing that local organizations, they get, I don't know, like 1% of like all this like funding that big organizations like World Food Program or Red Cross are getting, but they do, I don't know, like more than 80% of all the jobs of all the humanitarian relief on the ground. So we can start just by doing something about that. We can start just like with distributing like all this funding more equally. We can just again like cut the middleman. We can just like do away with all this like outsourcing, right? And then we can also probably have a discussion about like all this like transparency and reporting requirements, about like whether we really need to adhere to all those rules and procedures at the extraordinary times. Whether really these like 2 pieces of paper, they are worth a few lives that are being at risk while you're filling in this paperwork.
Yes. I think what you're saying is very, it makes a lot of sense also to me. I mean, I do work with NGOs and stuff as well. So I have some experiences, in that field, but not to the degree that you do, and also not at war times, which is an entirely different thing altogether. But I think that's a very, very good, point to take. I believe, the thing is, it becomes an industry as well. This is what sometimes people don't realize. It's, we look at NGOs, we look at, organizations like the Red Cross, but in the end, they are an industry, and there are people who make a living through that, and who also have vested interests in having, very, very cynically, but also in conflicts is where they make their money. So, obviously this is part of the problem, and decentralizing it, like you said, going to the ground roots, local communities, local organizations, maybe have a registry on a UN level of who, will be getting support, is a very good answer to that. Let's see what happens. I mean, maybe somebody will hear this besides Elon Musk. So that would be our wish, at least. Do you guys have a little more time? Actually, our time is up. I just want to know if you guys, because then I'll just do it. My last 2 questions, maybe, even though there's still so much on my list, because you guys are you just are incredible to talk to. So tell me. No, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, I have time until 2:30.
Okay, let me try and get it wrapped up before then, but thank you so much, already. Then, you know what I would like to, one thing, that I would like to know from you, because you said also, war makes one a quick learner. And I think that's, after everything we've talked about, it makes perfect sense. And I think we understand why. What I would like to know from you is, of all the things you learned in terms of your volunteering, or ever since the 24th of February, Mary, even a bit wider, what is the most valuable you've learned? The question goes to both of you, of course.
It's definitely not a yes or no question, so kudos for that.
Yeah, I learned my lesson. I'm asking open questions now, which is
Can I just
the
answer
101
yes?
of interview techniques. Yes.
Can I get again more social science and anthropologically if you're not tired of that?
No, not at all. I understand who I got into the van. So of course, by all means, please.
So, of course, there were like a lot of like practical things that I learned since the 24th and even a little bit before. But I mean, since I kind of normalized the full-scale invasion a little bit and found this voice again and started talking and thinking about it, I was constantly thinking about how we often underestimate the power of collective negative affects. Because I often see it in Ukraine, and I know that I am a part of. Ivan was talking about this feeling of anger, this feeling of being like pissed off, right? And I think that like theoretically, we haven't really appreciated how powerful and in many ways like creative this power can be. Because quite often we are talking about like, oh yes, this feeling of anger, this feeling of these being pissed off and blah, blah, blah. Those are like negative emotions, right? And there is this like culture of positivity usually, right? We have to smile to people and oh, how are you doing? I'm doing fine, thank you, and blah, 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 blah. And there have been like a lot of especially like in North America, right, trainings on like how to escape this like negative thoughts. And so there was a lot of this focus on positivity. And as a social scientist, I have been constantly thinking about this, how you can harness this like power of collective negative affects and how immensely creative it can end up being. So that is like one of the things that I have. I don't know if it is the thing I learned, one of the things I learned, but it's definitely one of the things that I have been trying to think about. That is one of the things that I was pondering since the start of the full-scale invasion.
Well, that's a great answer, and it's social science and all you said, but I think it's a great answer because it's true. We have so many. First of all, we have this expectation of goodness. I absolutely agree with you. The hedonism that is part of our society focuses on that. Like, how can everything just be always good for me? And we underestimate the creative and the creative power of negative emotion, like the being pissed off. Or I also believe we face so many crises at the same time. I mean, the climate crisis, instead of just being like, yeah, it's all going to be fine. I think the power of positivity in that sense is actually the problem, because we're like, yeah, it's going to be fine. Technology will find a way. Somebody will invent something and it will all go away. No, I think actually a lot of the times we have to tap into that anger and that being pissed off and then turn it into a creative force to be reckoned with. So I think that's a very, very important aspect you just mentioned there. Thank you very much, Dafna. That's very inspiring. What was it for you, Ivan? What has it been for you? You had a little more time to think about it now,
Yes.
No pressure, though.
I wouldn't say that there was anything that would reshape my view, that would change how I think. So in that regard, I wouldn't say that there was anything that I learned. Obviously, I learned a lot of small things, like a lot of things about the weapon or the army or the war, right, itself. But also just boring day-to-day simple things. But I got even more reinforced, and that's perhaps aligns well with what Dafna said, but about a slightly different thing. I got reinforced in the thought that there is a lot of hypocrisy going on once again when people in First World or North America, I'm not sure how to generalize, talk a lot about like there is a lot of sentiment like I don't want to see that. It's triggering. I'm not gonna watch it. I don't want to listen about it because it's about something horrible that is going on, and I will just stay blind to it. Right? You don't show me that. You can get it a lot in university, for example. Like the context that I know of, well, like don't show me this scene from a horrible film because I will be triggered. Don't show me this because it's super bad and I will feel bad about it. And I've been thinking a lot like things like that were going on about the war as well, right? Don't talk about this rape, don't talk about mass killings, don't talk about this, don't show me videos or photos of this. And I've been thinking a lot that it's a very privileged position. And it's a position that is very much hurting people who experience those horrible things that are predominantly experienced not in the First World, right? But unequally distributed to the places of suffering, which means poorer places of this kind of structural suffering. So things mostly happen there, not in the First World. They happen in the First World, but not on the same scale. And by staying blind, by refusing to watch and see, you allow yourself to, well, close your eyes and do nothing about it, right? You just want to be not hurt yourself. Instead of, no matter how it is, how hard it is, do know about it in order to change it. Because if you stand blind, you just, there is a big probability that you won't have enough energy to change it. Yes. You have to face what's going on in order to change what's going on. The point is not to stop talking about it. The point is not for that not to happen. And then if that doesn't happen, we are not going to talk about it.
I think there's even a more extreme to what you just said, Ivan. I think a lot of the times what I see is it's not just that I don't want to hear about it because it triggers me, but instead of seeing it and staying away from it, we look at it as a pretext to make ourselves victims, right? Like, for instance, I don't want to hear about, let's stay in the First World, let's say in America, because you said it, for instance, like Black Lives Matter or the discrimination of Black people in the United States, rather than hear about it or saying, I don't want to hear about it. A part of the white population instead is turning themselves into victims of Black racism. Right? So there's even this other extreme where it turns to that, or critical race theory is something that shouldn't be taught in school, which is something I don't want to listen to it, but then you take it to the other extremes and actually victimize yourself, even though you have no entitlement to that whatsoever. So I think that's a very important point. And I see that not just in the United States, also to be clear, I see that in Germany as well. I see that in a lot of other European countries. I mean, Italy has just had a landslide victory. Okay, maybe not landslide victory, but a victory of the far right. So we see that these tendencies are there. So to be mindful and to be conscious of that is very important. So when there is ever any sort of discrimination, listen to the people who say that they are being discriminated, and you will learn from that. And tapping into that a little bit as well, have you had an experience during your volunteering as well that has been very memorable, very moving, that you remember very well?
Yes, definitely. But can you say about any single experience?
See, that was a close question again. I don't learn from my mistakes.
It's hard to say.
And would you care to share it with us? That would have been the logical next part of the question.
There were many moving parts, and obviously that's part of volunteering that we did was we did it for us because it was much easier, and you felt yourself nice when you helped people, and people saw that and were thankful, and you were happy that you helped those people, right? It's a very nice emotion to have.
But it was also a nice distraction from all this doom scrolling.
Yes, you as I already wrote somewhere, you get your agency back by actually doing something, right? It's much more psychologically hard for you to just stay a passive victim and observe what's happening without actually trying to change it, at least somehow. But I'm not sure. There were many people that were very thankful, and anything particular?
Well,
I think I'm just like becoming callous because, like, yes, there were of course some of these things, but it's really difficult for me like to name one sometimes because just so much was happening in this very condensed period of time.
Yes, is it also to some degree, I don't know, because if there's so much happening, is it also a bit, is it not, I don't want to say blurry, but has it kind of shifted into one big experience? Could you put it that way? Like rather than little individual experiences, it is one big whole in a way.
Yeah, definitely in general, the time was experienced very differently during the war. Many people in Ukraine say that the spring and the summer were stolen from us. In the sense, obviously, there was a spring and the summer. The point is that time was experienced very differently. You wouldn't experience summer as here. It is a summer. I go for a vacation. Oh, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but at a certain point, you find yourself at the end of summer and you're like, oh, there was a spring and summer. Okay, I didn't mention it. You didn't experience summer as a summer because the time was felt very differently. I'm not sure how to explain it. I have no words for it.
I think, but
you are so concentrated on these immediate tasks at hand that you don't really pay a lot of attention to the weather, for instance, because I remember that like it was, I think, mid of July, and I was like, why am I feeling so hot? Why it's so warm? And then I was, oh yeah, it's July. Maybe I should change these like winter boots for sneakers. You know, it was these kind of things.
It's the middle of summer and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, okay, that I mean, I think that paints a quite a good picture as well. Dafna, you did like I said in the beginning, you did a research on the correlation between people seeking HIV treatment and their trust in the state. This is a bit of a break now, but I would like to know, first of all, what were your findings then, and whether that has changed over the course of the war, that perception of people of the state?
It's so it's an interesting thing to talk about because before the full-scale invasion, a lot of people, a lot of my participants, a lot of people that I was hanging out with, and I was mostly hanging out with people who use drugs, street sex workers, also like women who inject drugs, and a lot of these people, they were often like mad at state institutions like providing HIV services. They were also like mad at state institutions providing these methadone and buprenorphine treatment, these medicines that people with the opioid use disorder have to take every day in order to be able to function normally. Yep. And people were mad with the quality of this medicine. People were often mad at the infrastructure that is happening. So they were you would often hear how they hate the Ukrainian state. You would always hear like how bad things are. But like on the other hand, the Ukrainian state has been like expanding its presence in this harm reduction sphere year after year after year, because for a few years already, a lot of these state clinics, they have been like providing methadone and buprenorphine that was bought with the Ukrainian with the money from the state budget, right? And also like this state was steadily expanding its presence in the sphere of HIV reduction. HIV services and the reduction of HIV burden. And it was like really interesting for me to see how on February 24th, all of these people, they were like, fuck this invasion. Whatever we can do to help Ukraine to essentially like help survive this state that we have been like hating so much, we will do that. And so people started weaving masking nets. Some sex workers, they were baking bread and sending it to the armed forces. They were also fundraising and helping their own communities. So essentially, they were also involved in this war effort from day one. And when I was talking to them and asking them like, so like, what happened? Like, what kind of like motivated you? It was really funny to hear that. Well, of course, like I'm paraphrasing, but essentially they were saying like, oh, like we have come a really long way here, right? We have been like pushing this, like government officials, like the state officials in the healthcare sphere, like, or in some other sphere to do this for us and to do this for us. And we, like, as all these like marginalized communities, we already had some dialogue with some of these state institutions, for instance, with the public health center that answers to the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. So we have already had like so much going on for us. We were already kind of like a voice to be reckoned with. And we really understand that if Russia comes here, all these methadone programs will be closed here. That like there won't exist a single harm reduction program here. That we will be essentially like left to die. And we just like cannot afford that for ourselves, for our communities. So we stand here like, and we fight.
Wow. So so basically, I mean, the way that I understand that though is that through this full-scale invasion towards its citizens, the Ukrainian state, not to say how it was before, not to really be judgmental about that too much, but it has gotten a lot more legitimacy in a way. Could you put it that way? That there is a wider acceptance of the Ukrainian state and its efforts towards its own citizens since the outbreak of the war? Or would that be too simplistic?
I am not really sure that it is the best way to put it, because I don't think it's about legitimacy. I think it's about this possibility of dialogue and this like self-recognition on the part of these like many vulnerable groups that like we are like forced, so to say, that if you are not listening to us, that we can make you listen to us. So and it's also like a recognition on their part that if they live on the occupied territories, and a lot of them, they have like relatives or friends who stayed on the occupied Crimea and died because, well, all the harm reduction programs were closed. Like some of these people whom I also know, they're still in prison in the so-called Donetsk People Republic, basically like for having like some methadone on them. And it's also this kind of recognition that our very like survival depends on our ability to be this kind of force that can negotiate with the state, that can negotiate with the government, if I am being clear at all. And this is not really the thing that you have in Russia, right? Because like Russia doesn't really fund all these harm reduction programs. A lot of people with HIV, they're like not provided treatment, free treatment from state budget, right? And all those kind of things that we were taking for granted in Ukraine and that we were like criticizing because like, oh, like we don't like this and we don't like that, they kind of like appeared with people also kind of like saw them in the new light, so to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you can see it even through this war. Many people stop themselves short from saying everything they want to say, but because of the war. But people still have, you can see, still have this kind of attitude that is common in Ukraine. Like, we had only one president that
served 2 terms.
Served 2 terms, right? People start to hate the president, and the president is the main figure in Ukraine, political figure.
Who was with 2 terms?
Kuchma.
Kuchma, yes, of course. Yes, of course, yeah.
People immediately start to hate politicians who get into power in Ukraine. And you can see it through this kind of examples. And in general, people are they suspect the state very much, even to the skeptical. Yeah, they even to the point where it's completely unproductive. Like, Ukrainians are really, I would say, weird in a way about their relationship with the state. The state is never really trusted much, never really followed in many ways, except for this war, because it's so existential. But in many ways, initiatives of the state and so on. Ukraine is a weak state, but not in a sense as a weak state is often used as this kind of almost a synonym of a failed state. But it's weak in terms of it's very hard to implement some state policies. It's very hard to go on and force people to do something. Like, it depends, it's a simplification. But in general, Ukrainians are weird about their relationship with the state. And state is always held to the most harsh account it can be hold. Yeah.
But has there been a shift? That's what I meant by legitimacy, in the sense, because legitimacy, I don't even mean like from a, jurisdictional point of view, but legitimacy in the minds of people, because, if you think of the state contract, between the people and the state, inside the minds of the people needs to be something, okay, the power holds this power over me to some degree because of this and this. This is what I get in return. Right? So has there been a shift, let me put it another way then, maybe, in the relationship between between Ukrainian state and its people since the outbreak of the war? You believe?
It's very hard to say, but I would say my guess would be that after the war ends, or if it's frozen, then after it freezes, then Ukrainians will more or less go back to what they did before the war, which is fighting constantly, arguing about stuff, not trusting the state, trying to live parallel to the state, always working in gray zones in terms of law, like, oh, this is not completely illegal, but hey, I can do this. All this kind of informality, to use red alert, social science lingo again, informalities. So, like, what oftentimes people from the West call corruption, right? But it's not quite corruption. It's not always about bribes. It's more of exploiting gaps and exploiting some gray zones and, living parallel oftentimes to the state, not contra state, but not quite in the state. Just there are many very not unique, in no way it's unique, but the constellation of those practices is unique. Practices are not unique.
Sorry, I just kind of like going back like to this day and like to this like question of whether everything changed after February 21st. It can be like illustrated by like some memes like on Twitter, because also last Monday Kyiv was hit by Russian rockets, right? And one of the rockets, it hit the glass bridge in the very heart of Kyiv. And that glass bridge, it was built by Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. a few years ago. And though that glass bridge, it was hated by people from Kyiv from the moment it was built, because people were like, how? Sorry. People were saying like, oh, Klitschko, he doesn't spend money for the things that are really necessary. It was just like a corruption scheme. He was like laundering money by building that glass bridge.
We don't need a glass bridge. He'd better invest those money in transportation or
it's
something
unnecessary.
else.
It's very expensive and blah, blah, blah. So,
and why there is glass, and the glass will break very soon, and
so
all this kind of.
This thing was hated, you know, but like when the Russian rocket hit those bridge and the bridge it didn't break, people in Kiev, they were like, this is our glass bridge, how do you dare to hit it with rocket? And I think this attitude is pretty like illustrative of what has been going on in Ukraine about this. It was illustrative of this relationship to the state in Ukraine. Yes. Our state is not perfect by any means, but this is our fucking state, and we will decide what fucking happens here, like, and we will decide what to do with our politicians. So like, don't you dare to kind of like step on our territory, so to say.
And we can quarrel about it, but it's our quarrel and it's not your fucking quarrel. So, you know, this is also to delineate that in that sense.
Most people don't fight nowadays for Zelensky or even for the state, in a sense, entity of the state itself. Many people fight for Ukraine as this kind of cultural, political space where we can decide, motivated by anger towards some bully that wants to decide for us. But almost no one in Ukraine fights for Zelensky or whatever, or fights for this kind of state institutions and as they exist, for ministries and agencies and departments and bureaucracies. I don't know, for all the things that comprise the state, right? People.
Yes. There would also be a very small, you know, thin foundation to stand on if you just fought for one guy. You know, I think if the bigger the idea, the better. Also, in that sense.
I mean, all of that can change, and most of Ukrainians wouldn't mind. It's not about that.
Yeah.
So there is probably if those institutions wouldn't probably obtain legitimacy. Or Zelensky, he's still criticized in Ukraine right now. It just many people temper down, and I think they should. For right now, during the war, how they criticize and what they criticize, but it doesn't mean that people are somehow Zelensky or institutions, state institutions became super legitimate in the eyes of the people. I don't think so.
That's also very good, I believe, because obviously there will be at some point, politics as usual, and I mean as usual in the sense that, you know, right now a lot of energy is obviously consumed by the war, and obviously, but there will be a time, and we all hope as soon as possible, where war will not be on the agenda anymore, and then you will have to focus on other things again, and then there needs to be a critical public in a democracy to make sure that things are going the way that a majority hopes them to develop. So that's good. Yes. So one last thing that I have to ask you, because this is also about culture, right? I mean, the whole podcast also started about with my perception that there's a big cultural appropriation on the Russian side of Ukrainian culture, that is a bigger part of the problem, and that also paved the way to the gas dependency in Europe, Germany, and so on, and like this, you know, change by trade and all of this bullshit that was obviously completely flawed in everything. So I always felt this was also at the heart of this conflict, that especially the West and the rest of Europe always saw Ukraine a little too much like how Russia is looking at Ukraine, like little Russia, right? This is part of the problem. So, I have come across your article, and I'm not going to read the full thing now, Ivan, because we've spent a lot of time talking on a lot of interesting issues. But there's something that came to mind that I would like to know from you both, and it's about what. Let me just find it quickly. Randall Collins. You write about the sociologist Randall Collins and how he introduced the concept of emotional energy. I'm just going to read out a few sentences and then I'm going to ask you my question. So you write, sociologist Randall Collins introduced the concept of emotional energy, a resource that emerges out of our everyday rituals. Successful rituals produce high amounts of emotional energy, making us feel satisfied, energized, and even ecstatic sometimes. It drives us to be active, show initiative, and be creative. We store some of the emotional energy from successful everyday rituals in symbols that remind us of those encounters and possibly even moments of collective effervescence. The moment of pleasure from losing oneself in a conversation, or perhaps a rally, a sports game on a stadium, collective singing of an anthem. End quote. So after everything that we've talked about, I think that a lot of this plays a role in this as well, right? And I would like to know from you those symbols that Randall Collins is talking about, and as you point them out, what are they for you in the context of Ukraine? Do you have some symbols for you that are really Ukrainian for you and that you feel that are being attacked through this invasion and to this war? Or what would you make those symbols out to be?
That's a really good question. That is hard to find an answer for me.
I mean, it can be anything, right? It can be food. It can be a building. It can be but I'm thinking of it in cultural terms. Maybe you don't, and you don't have to, but it would be interesting for me to know how you look at your country in that sense, what your symbols are.
So there are certainly, there will be symbols for me that hold this kind of emotions or emotional energies that is related to that conflict. I'm not sure about what they are. I think I will be able to tell you in a few years or something when I will see something and start to cry. Something that would be just completely normal for others, but I will just see it and perhaps cry or whatever. But I think for Ukrainians, that's a really good question. I've never thought about it. Obviously, there can be this kind of obvious examples of the flag and whatever, the anthem. Yeah. Well, partly music. I think it became a symbol for me, actually, and for many Ukrainians. There are songs that really bring about a concentrated, that symbolize very much experiences through this war. There is a song, old song actually, from the beginning of 20th century, Ой, у лузі червона калина, that became suddenly a symbol in Ukraine for many people that holds a lot of emotions. It's not an anthem, official anthem or whatever.
I will link to it in the show notes too, for everyone to listen to, of course. Yeah.
It's, can you translate it?
I don't know the name of this plant in English that's mentioned.
Okay, you'll have to translate it yourself. I will translate it later.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to it. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Yes.
You can find a page of the song on the wiki page.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
There are some other songs that would be surprising, perhaps, for the people to think about as this kind of national, almost anthems. But there are.
Oh, the red viburnum in the meadow. It doesn't sound as poetic in English as it is in Ukrainian.
No,
that's often the case, isn't it? That's often the case.
Yes, because the name of the plant, it's very scientific the way it sounds in English, and it's just it kills the magic.
Yes. Anyway, I think there is a lot of going on with the music in Ukraine, and that certainly. In my case as well, what do you say?
I don't know, maybe I'm just being petty, but I'm just thinking about these stamps, you know that after the Moskva cruiser was sunk by Ukrainian forces, the Ukropashta,
the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, basically. Yes.
Yes. So the Ukrainian Post, it printed this famous stamp about like the Russian warship "Go fuck yourself," and one of the
I didn't know. Wow. Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
So and one of
They
the
printed
guys,
a stamp of the actual ship, and it said "Go fuck yourself."
Yes,
or
and
what?
there is a soldier basically like giving a finger
Amazing.
to the sinking warship. And the first printing of the stamp, it was so popular, though they printed like 1 million stamps, that it was like immediately sold out, and they had to print also like the second batch. And like one of the guys whom we were like helping in our volunteering, he was in the military, and he was also like helping the armed forces with supplies. He gave us those stamps. And
wow.
You also asked before about like one of the moments that we were kind of, like, oh, and melting down during our volunteering. And I thought that one of those moments when he just like gave us those stamps, it was such a kind of moment.
Moving.
Yeah, it was like very moving, and also like these small sarcastic images of this like sinking warship. They contain so much.
But that leads us, I think Randall Collins probably would be surprised, but many jokes became...
Back there, right? Yes.
No, even right now, I mean, meme kind of jokes, repeated phrases, words from the jokes, became those symbols that hold a lot of emotional energy. For example, me and Dafna, we oftentimes refer to memes from this war, and definitely they create a lot of positive emotions. Oftentimes, those are memes connected to famous in Ukraine. I don't know, bavovna, for example. Bavovna is Ukrainian. It's famous in Ukraine. Bavovna is a cotton in Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm.
But in Russian, you will understand why I'm saying all of that. But in Russian, there are two words: chlopak, which is cotton, bavovna, and chlapok,
which is like a loud slap.
This kind of noise from the slap, or perhaps if you pierce a balloon, that will be chlapok.
Okay.
So chlapok and chlopak are written in the same manner, with the same
letters.
Yes.
But really? Okay.
The difference between the meanings is the stress, right? Chlapok, chlopok.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken about the origins, at a certain point, and there were many stories like that and jokes based on that, but this is the most famous. Russians were trying to portray themselves in the comments to one of the publications as Ukrainians, to show that some Ukrainians, I don't remember exactly, to show that some Ukrainians don't like Ukrainian authorities or whatever. They were trying to do some kind of informational warfare. And they Google translated Russian into Ukrainian. And Google Translate does not know, do you mean chlopok or chlopok, right? Because you don't put a stress. So they translated that there was, they were talking about explosions in some Russian cities that are near the front line. And they meant chlopok. So, because complicated, because in
it's
Russia
not
they
cotton.
don't.
Yes.
Because they don't say that there are explosions. It's this kind of Orwellian language. They say that there is...
It's like the same as military special operation. They don't say explosion, but they say something. Okay, yes, okay.
They say not explosion, they say chlopok. This kind of sound of a piercing balloon happened when there are
So
explosions.
it's a euphemism.
Yes,
so they're using euphemisms, basically. Yes, okay.
And so they were trying to say in Ukrainian, pretending to be Ukrainians, that there was this chlapki. But Google
Yes.
Translate translated that as bawowny, so cotton. And they said there was some cotton in those cities. And that became a very big joke and a meme in Ukraine. And now every time something explodes, some airbase explodes in Crimea, for example, or whatever, Ukrainians say that there is cotton going on.
Cotton.
And there are
That is great.
bags with this. There are T-shirts with this, pictures on the internet. It became like a huge joke. Ukrainians all the time say, "Oh, there will be another cotton soon in Russian
thank
airbase."
you. Thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful, because it just, this is the intention of this podcast also, to have also culture as it is developing. And this is something that you've just explained there. And that's wonderful. That's really beautiful. Listen, now I know, there is so much more to talk about. I would ask Ivan, if you agree with me, maybe we can reconvene at another time to talk about your findings and your research into soldiers that have been conscripted and are going into war. I would very much like to dedicate some time to that.
Yeah, sure.
If you're willing to, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem.
But today we will close with the one question that I have for you. Just which Ukrainian aid should people who have the means and the time donate to? What would you recommend?
I would recommend a big one, Повернись живим, Come Back Alive. I trust it very much. They know what they're doing. They're trying to help.
What do they do exactly?
They try to help Ukraine win the war. They help the army quite professionally. They people who work there, mostly or almost all of them, have war experience and are actually specialists in one sphere or another. So they actually know what they're doing. Perhaps the better option even would be to help some of the very small initiatives, but in order to do that, you have to know people. They don't have a website, There's just some people who, for example, we have a friend who is a doctor, and she provides soldiers with medical equipment, right? But she doesn't have a website. It's hard to find. It's hard to donate. So it's better to
If you provide the link. If you provide me the links, I will just put them in the show notes and people can find it. That's probably the easiest.
I will just add also hospitaliers to that, because they are kind of also not such a big organization as Come Back Alive that Ivan was talking about, but they are also very known, and they are trusted, and they're essential like a tactical medical battalion in the armed forces of Ukraine, and they evacuate a lot of civilians, they evacuate a lot of wounded soldiers, and they also provide a lot of medical aid.
All right. I will link to that. And if you can think of anything else, send it over to me. I will include it in show notes so that people know exactly where to go, and even to the places that are hard to find for someone who's not familiar with Ukrainian web pages.
Yeah, we can also add another organization if you wish.
As many as you like. There's no limit.
There's
no limit.
Solidarity Collective.
Solidarity Collectives. Those are leftists who support
anti-authoritarians who are now fighting in the armed forces of Ukraine.
But they also provide some humanitarian aids to hospitals and whatnot.
I will link to that. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I took a lot more time than I told you to, because it was so interesting what you had to share. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I wish you really all the best, of course, and I hope that this air raid will end very soon.
Oh, it ended.
It ended.
Okay.
While we were talking.
Okay. Well, that's at least some good news to some degree, even though it happens thousands of times, I know. But thank you so much. All the best, and we speak soon. Ivan, we will speak again.
Sure.
You said you would be okay with it. I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah,
okay. Now enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Have a nice
Thank
one.
you, guys.
Thank you for inviting. Bye.
Bye. And with this, we are at the end of this week's ride in the yellow van. Thank you very much for coming along today, despite the very long wait. Thank you, Dafna and Ivan, for your trust in me and the work we do at Mind the Pump Productions. It means the world to us. The links to the initiatives of Come Back Alive and others mentioned by Dafna and Ivan you can find in the show notes. if you are looking for opportunities to support Ukraine and have a buck to spare. If you are Ukrainian and would like to come on the show, or if you know someone who should, please don't hesitate to contact us. We are always happy and grateful for anyone reaching out to us on www.yellowvanstories.com, where you can also leave us your general feedback or ideas for improvements, like, let's say, more consistency and more regular episodes. I hear you. Next week's episode is already produced and edited, so if you want to join us again and find the time, we would welcome you back next week for a brand new episode. Until then, keep loving in the face of fear and stand with Ukraine. Take it away, Jim.
Standing for your right.